I want to correct the record. So I was covering the China protests, right? And so I showed this. Remember, I showed you there was a fire, and the fire hose couldn't get to the thing, and they blamed it on the COVID restrictions. Well, it turns out it was just because there were cars parked in the street.
No, Jimmy, it's not. It's not just the fire truck issue. We can just let's just set aside the fire truck issue about getting close. Even shows up on the tweet you brought up that people were locked inside. They're welded inside their apartments and they couldn't escape the fire. That's a big problem. You can just ignore even if you just ignore the fire truck issue. The people they couldn't get out. It's a lockdown. I mean, in China, lockdowns are true lockdowns. I mean, you're welded inside your apartments. You can't escape. You're prisoners, and they're offered no way to escape in time to escape the fire. That's why they were killed by the fire. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah, so the viral tweets that were claiming this was due to zero COVID policies were, they were put out by the same people who labeled the Communist Party of China the CCP. Anytime I see CCP instead of CPC, I initially think this is probably propaganda. And it turns out it was.
As though it really makes any difference. We all know what's being referred to when anybody uses the term CCP. It still refers to the same thing, the ruling party of China. It's a monarchy. It's an oligarchy run by whether you call it the Communist Party of China, which is supposedly the correct one, or the Chinese Communist Party, which supposedly is incorrect. It's still referring to the same thing. And just because it's let's say it is propaganda. Just because it's propaganda does not necessarily mean it's false. It still could be true. There's such a thing as true propaganda. For instance, we go back to the era of the Soviet Union. There was a lot of propaganda that the Soviet Union during the time of Stalin had this thing called the Gulag, which was forced labor camps where political prisoners were sent to. And well, it turns out that was true. It was true propaganda. And that's my contention, is that the propaganda put out about whether you want to call it the CCP or the CPC, I'm contending it is true propaganda. Not false. It's true.
But what did spark? There were spontaneous protests against the COVID lockdown policy in China. What did spark it? Wasn't this?
No, so there were protests just against the policy, against local authorities that were continuing to push this zero COVID policy, because there was a lot of people who thought about a week and a half ago that there was going to be a national end or, opening up from the zero COVID policies, and that ended up not taking place. But now, after these protests have been going on in regions like Chengdu and Zhengzhou, we are seeing that these local authorities are essentially bringing an end to the zero COVID policies, especially in Zhengzhou. They announced that yesterday. In Chengdu, they announced that there's going to be a tiered reopening system.
You can even hear Jimmy laughing in the background there, because it's ridiculous that you can rely on the what's coming out of the Communist Party of China, their propaganda. Now, their propaganda is completely unreliable. There's no way to be any confidence, and they're telling the truth. They've been saying for a long time that they're gonna reduce these COVID restrictions, but and also these are not local. This does not come from the local jurisdictions within China. This comes from Beijing, from Xi Jinping. He's the one that's implementing. He's Captain Ahab. For whom zero COVID is for whom COVID is the white whale. He's implementing the zero COVID policy. He has not announced that zero COVID is going to end. So please, if I could be wrong about that, but if anybody has any any links to any such announcements, let me know. Put a link in the I don't know if they'll let you put links in the comment sections outside of YouTube, but oftentimes you can. But yeah, I think you can still put links to YouTube videos. Maybe there should, or just to say refer to some source where Xi Jinping has stated that there's going to be an end to zero COVID. But what I have seen is recently is the currently building a lot more of these COVID concentration camps, of which every night thousands are being dragged into these COVID camps, concentration camps. If they refuse, they'll be just with bodily force. They'll be just physically dragged into the camps. And currently, there's millions in China that are being forcibly held in these modern day gulags of China, of Marxist China. So it's just a continuation of Stalin's gulags. Now we have the Xi Jinping's gulags as Xi Jinping he's regressing back to the days of Chairman Mao and the misnamed Great Leap Forward. Now it's the Xi has his own form of the Great Leap Forward, where he's having this completely totalitarian dictatorship is being imposed on the people of China.
So when I showed these people holding up white sheets of paper, so this is on CNN, and these people are holding up white sheets of paper because this is like they're protesting against the government censorship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you make of that?
So these people were coordinating. There's really big Telegram accounts where they were coordinating these protests using a lot of the same tactics from the Hong Kong, and U.S. intelligence-backed protests in 2019. And these protesters in particular that were holding the white signs were paid to be there. They were being paid about $200 USD to show up per person.
Where are you getting this from, Jackson? So we're supposed to just take your word for it, I guess, that they're getting paid. But you're not going to provide us with any evidence of that, are you? Just and Jimmy's not going to challenge you on this. We're just supposed to just take your word for it, even though we know that CCP they'll crack down on anybody that protests, that puts up with these kind of protests. It could result in them going to prison for a long time, or worse. It could cause a death penalty. So we're supposed to believe that they're gonna risk their lives for $200 to protest. I don't believe it, but I guess Jimmy's just taking your word for it. I guess I don't know why.
So the Chinese authorities responded to this with the carrot and stick approach. Essentially, they said, well, there is discontent with the zero COVID policy amongst these regions, particularly regions that are in a lot of poverty right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin to ease the COVID, lockdown restrictions for those people. And then for the people that are calling and working with foreign sources, foreign media outlets that are funded by the CIA and make up the deep state, people who are pushing for regime change and color revolution, which were very, very, very small in scope, a small amount of people, but their voices were being amplified by the Western press. They're going to deal with them and isolate those people from the individuals who had real grievances with zero COVID policy.
So that's what we're supposed to believe, is that only the people who are being paid by these Western media and Western deep state, only those are the ones that are going to be sent to the gulags of China. But everybody else, just the ones that are genuinely against just heartfelt against the COVID restrictions, those they'll be okay, right? Yeah, right. We're supposed to believe that, or is that's what the narrative is that we're supposed to believe. It sounds like propaganda straight from the CCP, so that if we find out that people are being in prison and dragged off, and you get the death penalty for protesting. Well, of course, we're supposed to believe that, yeah, they're the ones that were getting paid by the Western media and the Western deep state powers. So, of course, there's no way of us to find out, of course, but we just have to take the word take the word from Jackson and the CCP that that's the case. And we'll just take their word for it, of course.
And then there's one more thing. So I showed this video, and I said this was part of the COVID protest, but it turns out this was at Foxconn, right? This video here, right? So you've seen that video. That's from is that from Foxconn? And when
so there were protesters. There were anti-zero COVID lockdown protesters that were breaking down barricades. But these Foxconn protests, which also took place in Zhengzhou, were about something different than zero COVID policies. And these were the biggest protests that we saw, and the most violent protests or, aggressive protests we saw in China and in the Zhengzhou region. And these were actually about something completely different. So again, the Western press was trying to make this seem like it was the end of the world for China, and this was all about the zero COVID policies. But in actuality, what this was about was there was a spike in COVID cases at the Foxconn factory in Zhengzhou, which is, again, a really impoverished region. And it's this company, Foxconn, is an exploitative Taiwanese-based company. And they told workers who were going to be hired temporarily due to a shortage of workers during this COVID spike at Foxconn that they were going to pay them 15,000 RMB, Chinese yuan, per month if they came in on a temporary basis and helped fill the void of the worker shortage. Turns out that Foxconn, being the corrupt company it is, they only paid these workers 10,000 RMB. The workers got mad. I mean, it's a slimy business deal. They told they were going to be paid a certain amount of money, and they weren't. And they protested in spite of that. So that's what actually happened at Foxconn.
So that protest wasn't about zero COVID. It was just about a regular labor dispute.
Yeah, Jimmy, we've got to clear it up, of course. Just because Jackson says so, it must be true, right? And then, of course, you're not going to challenge him. You're not going to do any investigation into this. So just take the word for Jackson. He must know everything about China and what's going on there. How he knows that, how he's getting intelligence, I don't know. But I guess you trust whatever he says must be true, right? Huh, Jimmy? That's how it works now? So are we supposed to believe those are a bunch of all those protesters were fighting against the guys in the those white hazmat stormtrooper monkey suits? Those were they rent-a-cops from Foxconn or what? Or were they actually more like CCP secret police that they were fighting against? So how are we to know? But we're supposed to just take Jackson's word for it. Apparently, he knows everything about what's going on in China. How he gets his intelligence, I don't know. But yeah, I don't believe it actually myself. And what I do believe is that China they have openly stated that they're Marxists. They continue to be devoted to the Marxist ideology. It's the same ideology that the Soviet Union and Soviet bloc countries were operating under. And Marxism, the problem with Marxism is it does not recognize individuals as having any kind of human rights. They have no individual sovereignty to find their way in life and to live their lives as they choose to the maximum amount possible, living in a society. And there's no need in Marxism. The Marx and Engels do not think that there's any need to grant the individual any rights of personal sovereignty, and as a result, governments that adopt Marxism, the expression "give them an inch and take a mile." Well, Marxism gives them a lot more than an inch, and the Marxist governments have taken a lot more than a mile in exploiting the people to achieve the ends of these Marxist dictatorships. So look back at the era of the Soviet Union and when they had the Gulag, and looking back then, the there was a lot of people in the Western countries, and including the U.S. They were told, oh yeah, there's a really bad system there known as forced labor camps, known as the Gulag, and people didn't believe it. The lefties in the U.S. they didn't believe it. They said, oh, no, that can't be true. But the reality was true. There's a lot of political prisoners being sent over to these forced labor camps in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. And the problem is that with Marxism, Marxism allows that sort of thing to happen. And so now we have this fast forward to today, and we're told about the problems with not just with the COVID lockdowns, but with the Uyghur peoples. Now, some people call it genocide. I'm not sure if that's the case, but there's definitely even the CCP have acknowledged that there is such a thing as re-education camps have been going on, forced re-education camps for the Uyghurs in China, that they totally acknowledge that. So now, yeah, but now we have with these COVID lockdowns and the zero COVID policy. There's plenty of eyewitness testimony. This is really bad. This is inhumane. People are being either welded into their apartments, or they're being dragged off to these COVID concentration camps by thousands every night. But we're supposed to believe Jackson here. This is no big deal. Who do you believe? I mean, I believe that whenever there's a Marxist regime, the worst can be in terms of you have two sides saying one thing and one side saying another. There's conflicting accounts here. Who do you believe? I believe those that are saying about the worst that's happening in any kind of Marxist government, because that's usually what happens whenever there's a Marxist regime. Usually it turns out the worst is happening in terms of human rights violations, because Marx did not recognize human rights. At least in terms of the individual human rights. He only recognized the right of the society as a whole, as in terms of the society as it moves through history according to Hegelian ideology. He was a Hegelian, and Marx was, and Hegel only recognized society as a whole. Also, he did not recognize the individual as a precious spirit being that they are, and as a result, Marx did not either recognize the importance of the individual as a spirit being that has the right to find their way through their life, as they let them live their life as they choose to the maximum amount possible, living in a civil society.
So, but I reported this, that in China, when they would show the World Cup, they would do it on a 30-second delay because they didn't want to show people not wearing masks in the crowd. And if there was a shot of them not wearing masks, they would want to censor that. Now, can you confirm that?
I hadn't heard that story. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Obviously, there is a lot of censorship in China to try and maintain their sovereignty.
So let me get this straight, Jackson. So you're saying that they are, in China, are engaging all the censorship to maintain their sovereignty? Really? That's your argument? I mean, it hasn't. So are you saying that if they had shown the audience at the World Cup, if Chinese citizens had seen citizens without masks at the World Cup, that would somehow threaten the sovereignty of China? Really? That's your argument? Oh, come on. I mean, let's look at here in the U.S. So does that mean? I mean, you're a U.S. citizen, right, Jackson? So why couldn't you also why couldn't we also make the case then that there's all sorts of propaganda coming from China to here? You look at it. You can see it anytime in the comments section of right in YouTube. I mean, I've made comments critical of the CCP in the comments section, and I've been inundated by commenters that I suspect are part of a CCP troll farm, criticizing me, criticizing my comments. Sometimes, a lot of times, they're rather ridiculous comments, which makes me suspect that English is not their first language, which leads me to suspect that they're actually writing the comments from China, and they're not. They're just spewing a bunch of CCP propaganda, and also usually these are like videos that I've when I've criticized the CCP, I've been pushing it back against videos that praised or defended the CCP policy, and whenever they have a video that does praise the CCP, then usually you get a lot of these commenters that praise the YouTuber that made a video and give it all sorts of upvotes, so that just one commenter after another just praising, oh, this is a great video, oh, wonderful, and like, really, it's not that great a video, and there's no sophistication in the comments. They're just saying, oh, so how great it is. So there's all sorts of propaganda coming from the CCP directed here to the U.S. So couldn't that be the case that these Wu Mao that are engaging in all this propaganda are threatening our sovereignty? So wouldn't that mean that we should be censoring them? And now we're talking. Jackson, he was recently censored from YouTube. It was like just for a day or so. He was gone from Twitter. He was banned for a day or so, suspended. And he was complaining about that. Oh, woe is me, I was censored from Twitter. But looking back, this kind of pot kettle. China doesn't allow Twitter at all. It doesn't let their citizens view Twitter at all. There's a double standard there, it seems like to me. I mean, so is Jackson thinking that, well, we should have, does he think we should have censorship here in the U.S. and suspend the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution to protect our sovereignty? I mean, the founders who wrote the Constitution, it's not like they're it's not like they were unaware of that. There's all sorts of problems with that can happen with free speech, and they had the courage to say, well, even though those problems could happen, we still believe in the importance of letting people speak freely, and the freedom of the press. Freedom of the press, freedom of religion, just the freedom of speech. It's very, very important, and it's not any including possibly it could be the dangers could include propaganda coming from other countries. It's not like really it could be there could be propaganda that could threaten our sovereignty. And so if we still should have freedom of speech here, even though we're going to get all sorts of propaganda inundated from countries such as China, from the Wu Mao commenters, but we still believe in freedom of speech, well, then why don't the allow freedom of speech in China as well, despite the possibility of propaganda going in there, even though it could threaten their, potentially threaten their sovereignty, could threaten our sovereignty too. Why the double standard, Jackson? Come on.